Hey everybody, this is Tim Chaves from Faith Matters. For today's episode, we brought on Dr. Julie Hanks to talk about the concept of developing a healthy self. This is a topic we've been thinking about for a long time, knowing that it's a subject that many Latter-day Saints have been discussing, and we felt that Julie was the perfect person to address it. In fact, Julie actually has a free PDF guide called 10 Signs of a Healthy Self that the conversation is oriented around. You can head to the show notes for a link to that guide. In the conversation, Julie helped explore why it's important to have a healthy sense of self, the difference between selfishness and self-care, and even what to do when your internal authority finds itself at odds with external authority. And to give you just a little bit more about Julie, she is a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist, owner of Wasatch Family Therapy Clinics in Utah, and host of the Ask Dr. Julie Hanks podcast. She has nearly 30 years of clinical experience and provides a ton of different online resources that empower women to prioritize their dreams, revolutionize their families, and personalize their faith. You can also connect with her on Instagram at Dr. Julie Hanks. I, unfortunately, was under the weather when this conversation was recorded, so this was just between Aubrey and Julie. I thought Aubrey did a fantastic job flying solo, and you'll hear that in the conversation. Thanks as always for listening, and we hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Julie Hanks.
All right, Dr. Julie Hanks. I'm so excited to have you in the studio. You are a hero of mine. So
you are
I'm
so sweet.
really excited for this. And we're talking about my favorite subject to hear you talk about. So
Oh, good. No pressure, right?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about 10 signs of a healthy self.
Yeah.
And this feels to me like something we're hungry for in our community. And I feel like you've really like given us a snapshot of a way to sort of assess our own sense of self and like where we are health-wise. And so I personally, like, I really loved this list, and it was so quick and something that you can just run through and it's free. And so we're just going to kind of talk through it, but I would love to hear you just explain what need you were recognizing in our community and how this project even came to be.
Yes. So after working with LDS women in particular for almost 3 decades, I realized that there was a lot of confusion about the self, what it is, should I have it, is it good, is it bad? And so, what is emotional health when it comes to the self? And so I just sat down and thought, okay, these are my thoughts about, 10 things that if you're healthy, these are things that you can do or you're able to do.
Yeah.
Just based on my work and research.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like this is a subject that is tricky because, you can hear language about selfishness and selflessness and use that to sort of deconstruct yourself, like really to try to root out preferences and things that make you. And I wonder if sometimes even we have the very best of intentions, and that's how we get to this place of feeling like a blank slate. And so I think it's really important to even establish that it's okay to have a self, because and there's also this culture of like individualism and like how is that eroding our relationships. And so what do you say to someone who comes into your office and they just feel like they give and give and give and they don't know themselves or have any sort of real container to hold their gifts anymore because they have no sense of self. So what do you say? What do you say to someone to establish that it is okay to have a self? And in fact, you need it.
Let's define what a self is first.
Okay.
So a self is basically the core of who you are. It's consistent over time. It's the seat of consciousness is another way to say it. We could say it's your soul or your spirit. It is the part of you when you are in touch with it is peaceful and compassionate and hopeful. It's kind of the best parts of us, the best part of us. Yeah. And so if you think of the self as a positive thing, like that's where we get inspiration. That's where I love that you said container for our gifts. That's just beautiful. I've never heard that before. And I'm going to steal that.
That's Richard Rohr.
But it's a beautiful thing, and it's necessary to have in order to have healthy relationships. So often in my work, particularly with women, it's like we want to skip the self-development part and just become selfish. And selfless and not selfish. Right. And you can't give up something you don't have.
That's so good. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So if I say, give me that water bottle, well, you can't give it to me unless you're holding it and you hand it to me, right? So we skip that self-development so often. And many LDS women get married young, have kids young, and never develop a strong sense of self. And then that becomes problematic later on for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
So one thing, back to your initial question, when people say, I don't have a self, I will often say, what did you love to do when you were younger? Like, what was a passion? It could be blowing bubbles. It could be swimming. It could be climbing trees. What did you love before?
As a 10-year-old.
Yeah. Before all of the socialization, gender roles and all those things kicked in. What did you love to do? And how can you bring that back into your life now? And you may have to modify it if you have a bad back and you can't climb a tree, but go watch kids climb trees. Or, for me, sun and water. So I grew up in Southern California, and my grandma had a pool, and we had a pool when I was really little. And it's just symbolizes freedom and fun, and it just makes me happy. And so I seek sun and water all the time. Like that's my happy place. And so I go to trips. When we go on trips, we go somewhere warm.
Yeah. And that just has such good energy. It doesn't feel like the energy of the way we describe selfishness. It really doesn't. It feels like creative and productive and
right.
Obviously a good thing. Yeah.
So selfishness and selflessness have the root self, right?
Yeah.
So they both have to do with the self. Selfishness is doing what's in your best interest without regard for others. Okay? It's not what's in your best interest.
Yeah.
It's doing it without regard for others. So doing what's in your best interest with regard for others is self-care.
Okay. Wow. That is such a useful definition. Okay.
So it's the without regard for other people and how it impacts them. That's when it becomes selfish. It's not doing what you want or need to do.
Yeah.
And that's where I think there's this big disconnect where we think anything that has to do with what I want is selfish. It's like, no, it's only selfish if you're not thinking about the impact on other people.
Yeah. So how does that change what a relationship looks like? Because I imagine that's maybe the biggest barrier for people who feel like they want to develop this and get more in touch with their highest self, who they really are. I imagine that the thing that is the scariest is imagining the way that will affect their relationships. So
yes,
what happens? Does that cause friction?
It can, because whenever humans change, other humans don't like it. It's really uncomfortable. So we relate with people kind of in habitual ways. We expect certain responses. And so when someone starts changing, so for example, a woman I'm working with a woman in therapy, and she's like, wait a second, I support everyone in my life, but my family doesn't support me. I'm going to ask for support, and I want to take a class on Thursday nights.
Yeah.
And so that may cause if she has a partner, the partner may be like, well, wait a second, I do this on Thursday nights. Or the kid's like, well, where's mom? And it's going to create some tension, but that's okay. It has to balance out. And over time, it's really hard to have a relationship with someone who doesn't have a strong sense of self, because you don't know them, because they don't know themselves.
Right.
So it really limits intimacy. But sometimes we're so focused on avoiding any kind of tension or conflict that we don't develop a self. But that's over time, that's going to really negatively impact relationships more than tension.
I totally believe that. It's like your choice is tension or resentment, and which one is more poisonous to a relationship.
Right.
One of my favorite things that Brene Brown talks about is how important it is to learn to take responsibility for what you want and need. And that was just revolutionary. It's not, because it seems like it is actually impossible to not have wants or needs. And so the choice really is you get comfortable with that, and you learn how to talk about it and claim it.
And ask for it.
And ask for it. Yeah. And feel some tension, but feel closer. Feel, like you actually have a connection in relationships, or you're silent and then you
resent.
are feeling resentful. Yeah.
And your needs don't get met and your wants don't get met. And then you wake up to yourself, after your kids are gone or whatever, and go, oh my gosh, who am I? What do I like? I don't even know. I haven't asked myself what I want for so long. And a lot of women I've worked with, they haven't even asked themselves, well, what do I want for my life? It's like they're the supporting character in their own life instead of the main character.
Yes. Yeah. I think we could spend a lot of time just on how that happens. And, I think we have language for interpreting that is what we're meant to do. That, like, if that's how you hear helpmeet, then you become the perfect helpmeet. And that looks like playing a supporting role in your own life. And so I think we're doing so much work to undo that as a church culture, because I think you are. I think it was never meant to be that way. It was always like, that was always something that we could feel was off, and this feels like part of the correction.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a really good foundation for why it matters, and that it's going to be good in the long run, even though it's really scary.
Yeah. And I focus a lot on women with this topic, because we actually do a better job encouraging boys to develop and young men to develop a self, to develop leadership skills and interests and goals for your future. And there's a little bit more room. We don't emotionally support them very well, but in terms of developing kind of preferences, and it's more socially okay. And so I find that with female clients, there's more work to be done.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Okay, so let's see how many of these we can get through. So the first one is you consider the opinions of others, but you make the final decision for yourself. And I love this. I think this is a tricky one. And what I wanted you to talk about is that, we value obedience in our culture. And so I think that's maybe the term that immediately comes up for me, is like, then how does obedience fit into this sense of self? Like, is it possible to do both if you have some sort of external authority telling you what's right? How do you reconcile both of those things, or is it even possible?
Yes. So ultimately, it's a choice to do what that leader has asked. It's also a choice to not do what they ask. So claiming that as my choice is how you, like, I may choose to not obey. I may choose to obey.
Yes. Okay. So let me press you a little bit. So I think the thing that is tricky is if that leader in your mind is inseparably connected to God, then it almost feels like, is there really a choice? Like, is it just a choice between good and evil? Because in that sense, it almost feels like you're compelled to obey,
Right.
And so,
okay.
Break it down.
Yeah. It's important to separate heavenly parents from earthly leaders. So that, like, for your mental health, those are separate. Yeah. Right? They can have revelation, they can be inspired, but they are not deity. And that you can, but it's not healthy, in my opinion, to collapse those. Right. Yeah. And so I talk a lot about the tension between personal authority and general authority and local authority, right? Which is what you're talking about. Yeah. And at least for my life, it has been very helpful to my mental health to claim personal authority over my life. That ultimately trumps everything else, including my husband's opinion, my bishop's opinion, and I had an experience as a young adult where the prophet said something, and my personal revelation was like, okay, you get what he's saying, but this is the path for you. And it was different. And I'm not giving everyone permission to go, but it was personal for me, right? Yeah. So general authorities give general counsel to the church, but ultimately which is one of the great things about our faith, is that we are entitled to personal revelation. Right. And so that, I think, in terms of a self, that has to be our guide.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way to put it. And we had actually just talked about this idea that general authorities are giving general counsel. And so you're the one who decides how that fits for you and what that looks like for your own life.
Yeah.
So then my question, I guess, really is, it seems like there must be some sort of shift between childhood and adulthood, because I think if I let my 4-year-old claim her personal authority, she would, well, today she wanted to wear tights without pants, and like it was a little weird, and like that, like she's very in touch with like exactly what she wants.
Yeah.
And so it feels like there must be some sort of transition. Is it just like these are just developmental stages? Like when do you start shifting from having an external authority to the more stability with your internal authority?
Well, some people never make that shift. So if you think about it in terms of stages of faith, there are some people who they are fine relying on external authority, and that works for them.
Yeah.
And there are some people where that's not okay, where there's just more of that interplay between personal and general authority. And so one's not right or wrong. It's just there's so many factors that play into it. Temperament, the culture you were raised in.
Yeah.
And then I'm referring to Fowler's stages of faith, right?
Yeah.
James Fowler says that organized religions seek to create and maintain stage 3 faith, because that moves the organization along. So that we need people that, and in stage 3, it's external authority is where the power is. And so it makes perfect sense for the organization, because you move a group of people along together. But if you move to another stage and your personal authority moves to internal, that's when
there's dissonance.
There is. And it's not one or the other, it's both and.
Yeah.
Right? I heed the counsel of the leaders. Right? But I'm true to my personal revelation. So you don't throw one out and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're in the church, there can be this interplay between those two. And I think that's where wisdom can be found, where truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just feels helpful to even name it, because I think if you're in this stage 3 place where things are very black and white, it's really disconcerting to be moving into this, like recognizing this shift and having a more internal authority. If you don't have language for it, all you recognize is like the world feels like it's falling apart.
Yeah. And I'm bad.
Yes.
Right. And something's wrong with me because
I'm not
this isn't
worthy
working
of the Spirit.
anymore.
Yes. Yeah. So I love just like having language to wrap around that. That is what that experience is. Like there maybe this shift, you're recognizing dissonance, and and hallelujah, like that's great. That can be growth. Like that can be a signal of something really healthy that's happening.
Yeah.
As opposed to this this real like deficit in faith, which I think is often how we interpret it. So
right, because it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary for the people around you, and it's scary for the individual going through that change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm glad you brought up Fowler. I love Fowler. All right. So I'm generally aware of my thoughts, feelings, and needs is the next one.
And wants.
And wants. Yes. And
that
wants.
matters too. Yeah. So feelings, thoughts, needs, and wants. So I'll ask my clients like, okay, tell me 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
Feelings, thoughts, needs, wants.
Okay.
So can you identify at any moment what those are? So can you differentiate between a thought and a feeling? Right? Like I'm thinking this, I'm feeling scared or nervous or sad or happy or whatever. Yeah. And then what do I need? So that's something that's crucial or important for your survival. And then want is kind of like preferences and likes, and like I like movies and I like if you're just like, whatever, I don't care what. And some people are just easygoing, and that's great. But if you never can identify one or more of those areas, there's some work to do on developing a sense of self.
So what is work? If you get to number 2 and you're like, well, I just struck out. Like, I don't know what I want, that if choosing where to go to dinner is just like anxiety inducing, if a preference that meaningless is stressful, or just doesn't feel worth it to just, if it feels like you just don't care, then where do you start? Like, what is the work? What does the work look like?
Just start making choices. Like just start practicing using your agency.
Yeah. Okay.
Just pick something. So when I have clients, I've had clients who are like, my kids are gone. I don't know what I want to do next. What are your interests? I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, just pick something random. And then you can eliminate that as a possibility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Until you find something that lights you up. So just pick something.
Yeah.
If you don't care, then be like, Indian food tonight.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Like
It's a skill.
love. Yeah, it is a skill. It is a skill. One of my favorite books is by Thomas More. It's called Care of the Soul, and he talks about respecting what your soul presents. And I loved like framing it that way. That just grasping on to anything that arises, like any preference that arises. As soon as you start recognizing this as work, I think then you really value any little whim that comes up, and it just feels like once the train gets moving, then suddenly you're just flooded with all of these things that really spark joy.
Yeah.
So
and
love it.
then think about the impact of that on relationships. Like to be in relationship with someone who's joyful and passionate and who knows what they think and feel, you can know that person because they can share who they are in a more meaningful way.
Yep. I believe that so much. That's so real. All right. This is a big one. Okay. You allow others to think and feel differently than you do.
Yes.
This is hard. And I want to talk about this in the church.
Okay.
Because there are some cases where there is someone who explicitly has stewardship over us. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there is often this conflict that comes up where you are maybe sitting in a chapel or maybe sitting in a classroom or maybe sitting at home watching general conference, and you're recognizing that something is deep, like hurts deeply, like you're feeling offended, or you feel just disagreement, or you're just recognizing this vague sense of dissonance. Mm-hmm. And it can be really scary to navigate how much it's okay to disagree.
Right.
And then to figure out what to do with it.
Yes.
So
we are really bad at that in our culture. We need consensus and conformity. And that is not what Christ taught.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He didn't teach consensus and conformity. I mean, he hung out with rebels, and he was a rebel, and he didn't conform. And so he taught faith.
So I want you to define that a little bit more, because I think that the conflict is people are trying to decide, does having faith look like trusting what the leader is saying, even though it's causing dissonance?
It can. But I think ultimately it's about our faith in Jesus Christ, not in the leaders. Like our faith isn't in the leaders. It's in Jesus Christ. And we believe that they receive revelation from Jesus Christ. So there's that interplay again between general and personal. The leaders have done or said things where in my heart, I'm like, I don't believe that. And that's my personal authority. That's myself saying that does not resonate with me. And that's okay. I don't have to leave the church. We've kind of created this culture where if you don't agree and conform, that you're out.
Yeah.
If you disagree with the leader, you're out. You need to leave because we just want consensus, conformity, and and certainty.
Yeah. Right.
And it's okay to wrestle with things. It has to be. Not everybody's going to think and feel the same things or want and need the same things, including our leaders. And they're trying to figure things out too. They can be inspired, and they can also be not very inspired.
Yeah.
And so how are we going to know? Personal revelation. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about, I think that a lot of times it feels like there's sort of this trade that you have to make, that you can either really claim that personal authority, and then you feel kind of like an outsider in your community because you're being authentic and you're not conforming in a way that at least it seems like the rest of the room is conforming. Or, you abandon that sense of self, and there's something really that feels lost there too, but at least you have belonging.
So that binary is not healthy. It's not healthy emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, in my opinion. It's both and. So if you're saying, oh, I'm just going to claim my personal authority and I'm not going to care what the leaders say, right? And I'm going to do the opposite. In fact, like they're still controlling what you do.
That's good.
Right? It's just the opposite side of the same coin. And I think spiritual maturity is being able to tolerate the tension between those two and navigate like, I think I'm going to let the general authority kind of take the lead on this. That feels right to me. I'm really going to claim my personal authority in this and have that wrestle.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. And I think we've pathologized that in some ways. Like, no, it has to be either or. It has to be this or this. And nothing is just this or this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So when you're sitting in Sunday school and let's say the lesson takes a turn or there's a comment or something that really, makes you feel that big no on the inside, how do you decide walk us through maybe like what a healthy self can look like in a situation like that?
Yeah, great question. Curiosity. So what's going on with me? So what's happening here? Being able to reflect, what am I thinking about this? How am I feeling about this? And then curiosity about the other person. Where are they coming from? Because it's not where I'm coming from. So get curious about their story. Everybody makes sense when you know their story.
Oh, so true.
Everyone makes sense. And that's just one of the great things about being in the mental health profession is you get to hear people's stories and go, oh, of course I would have done that, or I would think that, and if I had your background. And so then after I've kind of thought about that, and this, like I said, this is a skill, right? Like to be able to go, oh, okay, here's what's going on, and think about those things. Then I have to weigh like, okay, is it a good time to make a comment? And I also keep like, I think who is in pain? And is this going to create more pain or less pain? And if it's going to create more pain for someone in the room, like those comments where people are just talking about, oh, all my kids got married in the temple and all of my kids went on missions. And then, the person sitting next to you, none of their kids are active. None of them, Yeah. And so I may speak up to protect that person because I care about that member of the flock. Like I care about that. Yeah. And I may raise my hand and say, that equation doesn't always work, and it's not an indication of righteousness. And that's just kind of where I'm coming from. And in my experience, I've seen people go on missions and get married in the temple who have totally inactive parents or parents in prison, or it doesn't work that way. It's not that simple.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. We talked to Mally Bonner a few months ago, and he said something about how he tries to always err on the side of the suffering. And I think that's such a good paradigm. Like, what if that's your way of going to church? Like, that's what you kind of have in your mind. That seems like a really good way to make a decision in the moment.
Yeah, it's like, is there the one sitting in this room that's going to feel isolated, alone, disempowered, not part of the, I mean, that's really where my heart is like, who is the one that's going to walk out of here if I don't say something or somebody doesn't correct the, it's hurtful comment. Yeah.
And that just, to me, really brings this back to why it's so important to sort of cultivate this healthy sense of self, because without it, I think all you experience are the feelings. And it's really hard to articulate even what is happening except pain. And so being able to develop that skill and recognize in the moment the thoughts and the feelings that you have make you more able to be an instrument in that situation.
You can be an advocate for those in pain. And just by making a comment and opening up it's usually about opening up more possibilities. The comments that are really hurtful are about closing those. Well, if you do this, then this will happen, right? And it's kind of opening up comments that open up more inclusion and more possibility, that's usually what kind of takes the pain level down.
Yeah, it's a different energy. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. That's actually something we've really we've explicitly really tried to do with Faith Matters, is like, that's always the question, like, does this open onto something else, or does it get smaller? Because that feels like the spirit, to me, that it is that feeling of expansion and growth, and that's the same energy that we're trying to tap into.
Yeah.
I think when that's kind of that's the even just like thought pattern that we choose to follow, something that feels like opening instead of closing.
And isn't that the definition of godhood, is being so expansive that you see and know everything? you know?
Yeah.
I mean, so anything that expands us is toward godhood and goodness.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. All right. So the next one is, I have a clear sense of values, priorities, and preferences, and I can clearly express them. Okay. So we kind of talked about this with practice, having a good, just practice having opinions about anything. Maybe let's skip up to the next one. I accept responsibility for outcomes of my choices. So I want to talk about this, boundaries versus blaming, because I think sometimes not having a self looks like taking responsibility for everything, because you're just like, you don't even have enough of, to me, it feels like a backbone to say, like, this hurt my feelings, or this, I did my best here and this could not be helped, and I'm not going to take responsibility for this, for someone else's job.
Right.
So talk about the difference between having healthy boundaries and blaming others.
In this one, I think a lot of it is being able to hear other people's pain because of your missteps.
Wow.
Right? Like, what is the impact of my choices on other people? And being able to tolerate hearing that. Like, Mom, when you raised your voice at me, that really hurt my feelings. And that was scary. And to be able to say, I am so sorry. I bet that was really scary. Like, that takes a strong sense of self, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I go with that one. Can you tolerate the negative impact of we can all tolerate, like, tell me the good things, right? But when someone says that hurt, or a friend says, being left out of that gathering was really painful for me. And you can say, I can see that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Without
going to
defensive.
Shame or defensive or blame, right? Like, okay, I'm a horrible friend. No, right? That's, or, well, it's not my fault. It's so-and-so didn't want to invite you. We can take all these stances, but just being able to to be present with other people's pain that we had a part in takes a strong, healthy sense of self.
I'm thinking of this conversation we had with Patrick Mason, and I think it was, and Tom Christopherson. I think it was their conversation about when Elder Holland gave the talk at BYU that was really hurtful for a lot of people. Yeah. That Patrick said, we just don't do conflict well. Like, we confuse conflict and contention. And in an effort to not have contention, we refuse to have conflict. Yeah. So maybe that's where this shows up. It's definitely scary. It really is.
And I think it's similar to what Patrick Mason was saying, but I use tension and contention.
Oh, okay.
So tension is just like discomfort and difference.
Yeah.
Contention is like attacking, like personally attacking someone or intentionally causing harm to someone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's same concept.
Okay, so I hate this. I hate confrontation more than anything. And in the moment, I know, and I hope some listeners will be able to relate, that in the moment, it feels like it's just not worth it. Like, I will take care of my stuff by myself, so we never have to talk about this. That's always what I would prefer. So why is it worth having, those conversations where there's a lot of tension? Like, I think, my train of thought is that it's just going to make the other person feel bad. Like, then there are two of us that feel miserable. Yeah. So why not just, I'll come back when I feel better?
It promotes growth.
In the relationship or
yes, and yes.
Okay.
It promotes growth. When you have to, like come up against someone, like say a spouse, and be like, no, I don't think this is a good idea. And they're like, nah, and back and forth. It really, that's what refines us in relationships. We have to kind of come to some creative solution that we haven't thought of. We have to decide whether, like, okay, do I let go of is this pride? Is this, oh, maybe he is right. Maybe this is the best step for our family. I mean, we have to wrestle with really hard things and that forces us to grow.
Yeah, I see that. And there's something about seeing each other more in like a more accurate way, like really
authentic.
Like,
being authentic.
Yeah, like that in it. I just believe now that like that all by itself creates connection, even if it's something like acutely painful. Yeah, just like having a more accurate vision of each other creates some sort of
intimacy. That's the definition of intimacy, right?
That's what I was going.
I always say said to my kids when they were little, like, we can think different things and still be friends. Like, you can think that M&M is red, they can think it's green, and that's fine. You can still be friends, right? Yeah. Like, we can see the world differently and still be connected.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is I enjoy the company of others, but I also enjoy time alone. So I was curious about this, like alone time. This feels like something that matters to me, but I thought this was just a personal preference. So is there something about being alone that like helps you sort of refine that sense of self, or why does it matter?
Yeah, that's the time when you get to know yourself. And there are a lot of people who are very uncomfortable either being with people and more comfortable alone, or more comfortable, being with people and uncomfortable being alone. When I was doing therapy as a teen, one of my assignments from my therapist was to go and either go skiing or go by myself or go to dinner by myself, do something that I'd never done before by myself. And that was part of the assignment, was to go and be with yourself and figure out how to enjoy your own company, or notice what comes up, and so it's a great exercise in getting to know yourself. People can be distractions, and also good reasons to not develop a sense of self. Like, well, I'm taking care of my family.
Right.
Well, okay, that's great, and that's a good thing. And what about what you want and need?
Yeah. And I'm thinking of all the other twos on the Enneagram, and how for some people, I think it's impossible to know how you're feeling when you're with someone else, because you're feeling their feelings easily, right. You're really cognizant of how they're feeling and what they want. And so being alone just kind of feels like a detox, just, you don't have any other influences, no one else to please or help.
Yeah. And so that's why finding that balance of like enjoying, I can be with people and I can be by myself. Yeah. And the amount will depend based on if you're an extrovert or an introvert, where you get your energy.
Yes.
Right. So introverts get their energy from being alone, extroverts from interacting with others. But everybody needs to be able to navigate both of those worlds.
Okay, so I can empathize with others without taking on their burdens. So I wanted to dig into this because, we covenant to do this. We covenant to take on burdens. And I think, especially now with social media, it can be really tricky. You can scroll for a half hour and have, an endless list of burdens that you want to alleviate. And that can be really overwhelming. So how do you reconcile this sense of self and lifting others' burdens without giving more than you have?
Yeah. So there's a difference between helping someone with their burden and carrying their burden. So if you think about someone has a backpack on that's full of rocks, I can take one, I can lift from the back. I can take one arm and help them for a while. But if I take that burden on and I put the backpack on, I'm actually telling them, I don't trust you to deal with your own problems. I know better than you how to navigate your life. And that's That's not true.
Wow.
And if you take the backpack on, someone else's backpack on, I mean, you have your own, everybody has their own burdens. It can prevent you from actually taking action to help ease their burden.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember reading a parenting book a long time ago about this idea that two people can't feel responsibility for the same thing. They're the same amount of responsibility for the same thing. So if you feel more responsibility for your kids' homework, then you've just taken that from them and they feel great.
Right.
You know?
They're like, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see that. I can see that, but also I think what I hadn't ever put together was really that it does kind of signal this lack of trust that you know better. Like there's like a pride that sort of enters that relationship.
And it's this weird sense of pride in being Christ-like, helpful, all those kind of, but it's really about, I know better than you how to live your life. And if you would just let me take over, your life would be so much better.
Yep.
And that is robbing someone of their growth opportunities. And what happens when people do that, and I've worked with individuals who have done that, like they're carrying all their kids' backpacks and their parents and they can't help anyone.
Yeah.
They can't actually do much for other people because they are so burdened.
So what does that language look like when you're being supportive as opposed to taking the backpack? Like what would be an example of the difference?
Yeah. So give me a burden.
Let's say if someone has lost their job.
It's being with them in their suffering. And then when you're not interacting with them, handing that over to them. So you're not taking it with you, right?
Yeah.
So
interesting.
we're getting into like really nebulous emotional boundary stuff here. So being able to go into it and sit with them and acknowledge and validate, like this, I bet this is, it sounds like it's so scary and you don't know what you're going to do next, or what do you need from me, or just listen, give them a hug, whatever. And then when you're done with that interaction, like picture handing that, that's their thing. You can't fix that for them. I mean, you can make suggestions, but the less you take on permanently of someone else's burden, the more help you can be to alleviate their burden. Like, it's ironic, right? You think, well, if I just take this on. So this is related to the worrying about people. I'm so worried about them. It feels like love, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's taking on a part of their burden that's not ours, and it prevents us from actually taking action.
Oh my gosh. That's so interesting. And it almost feels backwards. Like I feel like I can see people saying like, no, I should be depressed for this person.
Right.
Like it should.
So what good is that doing the person?
They probably just feel guilty that
you're right. They feel bad that you are now depressed about how depressed they are.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it
doesn't work.
Nothing. And in fact, I really believe that it hurts our ability to be helpful if we take on, and it feels like love, but it's counterfeit. It's not love.
Yeah.
Worrying, ruminating about other people's problems. Again, it sends the message, well, I can solve this for you. And you can't. You can support, you can help, you can offer suggestions.
What does that look like with not young children? I think there's an extent with young children, especially, where you really have to handle the problems for them, a lot of them. But what about, kids who are growing up and starting to develop as, they're developing their own sense of self. How does that look? Like, how does that trade start happening where you let them carry more and more of their burden? I really think that even little kids carry they have to, you're not living there, like you protect them, you do everything you can, you take care of their needs, but you can't feel their feelings for them.
If someone doesn't share a toy, like they feel sad. What good does it do for you to feel sad?
Yeah.
For
okay.
them.
Yeah.
Does that,
Yeah.
but you're going to help, you're going to give them skills. You're going to teach them. You're going to, help them negotiate that. Or if they fall and hurt their knee or break a bone, it's like you can empathize, like, oh, that must hurt
Witness
so bad.
it. Yeah.
You
can,
witness it and validate it, but to feel it for them.
Okay.
What does it do? Nothing. It does nothing.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
So even little people have to carry their own burdens.
Yeah.
They just have a lot more. We have a lot more influence in training them how to handle it, how to manage and giving them skills.
Yeah, and I can see how that would be so empowering to feel like, your parent or this person that you trust knows that you can figure it out. Like, is there to support you however you need, and totally trusts you to be able to have the strength to handle whatever it is.
And they're there to help you
Yeah.
and teach you and guide you, but not take over for you.
Yeah.
And of course, there are some times where you need to, if your kid's being bullied, you need to go meet with the teacher, right? We're not talking about that stuff, but just their individual experience, they're having that experience. It's not your experience.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Let's see. I can be flexible when things don't go as planned. I like this one because I don't associate this with a healthy self. Why is this connected?
So if you think about just in terms of health generally, flexibility is a sign of health, right? Like if your body is flexible, if your organs are flexible in dealing with whatever their job is, if you are flexible in terms, so it's not so flexible that you contort, right? But you can be, it's like you don't have to have your way all the time, and you don't have to allow the other person to have their way all the time, where it's, again, that tension between two people who are different, but you can tolerate it. You can tolerate frustration. You can tolerate not getting what you want.
Yeah.
And that's a skill.
Yes, I believe it's
do
a
that
skill.
very well.
Yeah. I've noticed this even with something as small as like waiting in a line or waiting in traffic. And I can feel, the frustration that rises up when I realize another line is going faster and it shouldn't be because, I was here at the same time or whatever. Like that feels like an opportunity to really practice like letting it be. Like this is not where I want to be and I want to go faster. And it just feels like a really good daily practice to have to just breathe and totally accept that I picked the wrong line and it's okay.
Like, I'm going to have time to sit here and be with myself.
Yes. It feels like that same rigidity, affects me in a line and it's the same rigidity that affects me in relationships. So I loved that one was on the list, but I never really connected it to self.
Yeah. Flexibility is a sign of health.
Yeah.
In all systems and individuals and
Yeah, I love it. Okay, I can take a stand for myself and others when I see injustice or unkindness. So we kind of talked a lot about that, but one more thing I wanted to ask about this was just, do you see a benefit to that kind of pain? Because I think, in a perfect world, we would all choose to just not have conflict, to just go, throughout our day and throughout our Sunday with peaceful, uplifting feelings. And, that's easier. Like I'd rather always have positive emotions all the time. So I just wanted to know, like, what do you feel like having kind of almost constant tension, like it seems like we're going to always be bumping up into things that cause a little bit of dissonance, whether it's a relationship or in the institution of the church or in anything. And so do you think that tension all by itself is good for us necessarily?
Yeah.
Always?
Well, it's not always tension. I mean, but
yeah,
frequently, if you're dealing with other humans who are different than you, you're going to bump up against things, or other systems like the church organization or your, community or whatever. Yeah, that's going to happen. But this is like, do you have the strength when you see something that's wrong to say something or do something to advocate for yourself or someone else that doesn't have the power to do it?
Okay, it's kind of like we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is not insurance that it even exists, but I think to someone who feels nervous about this, who feels like, yeah, see, having a sense of self is going to cause too much conflict. Like it would be easier to just keep it smooth sailing. Is there a way to just, I know you can't guarantee, but like a way to ensure that this isn't going to break a relationship, whether it's a relationship with the church or a relationship with a person. Like how can you bring yourself in a way that can be good for everyone? Like, is there, do you know what I mean? Like,
there is no guarantee. It may break. And so the alternative is you don't develop and you stay in a underdeveloped marriage, which a lot of people do. It doesn't necessarily mean things are always going to be better. Doesn't mean it's going to be worse either. It's always going to be a combination, or some kind of combination. But some people, as they develop a sense of self, they see, or they decide, their self decides, I can't be associated with this organization.
Yeah.
And that's their choice. Or some people, as they develop a sense of self, and it really depends on, like in a marriage relationships or a partnership, how the other person responds, right?
Yeah.
If they are like abusive or attacking or really putting you down, it's like, well, that's good to know.
Right.
Do you want to be in that kind of a relationship where you exerting what you think, feel, want, and need, it is, met with anger or, hurtful words. I mean, anger is not hurtful. Angry feelings aren't hurtful, but do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting. I mean, I think maybe what it reveals is like, are you prioritizing this thing that is outside of yourself over developing the self? Like, is the relationship more important than developing a self? Is the relationship with whatever it is more important? And so I like this idea that like whatever happens, like whatever the consequence is, what is happening is growth. And so that at least feels secure, this is forward movement. This is forward growth. And if suddenly you can see finally that this is an abusive relationship, then isn't that still the best thing?
Right. And sometimes when we talk about these concepts, we tend to think of like this forceful, like, I'm going to exert myself. That's not at all what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's really this balance in all relationships. Like, I matter and you matter. The general authorities matter and my personal authority matter. And being able to navigate that tension. It's not just, my way or the highway. That's not what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. I can feel that. I really think it is a matter of developing something, to hold your gifts. And that means you bring more to the table in any relationship.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that you paused to say that. And I want to talk in a healthy relationship where maybe like we had talked about that women often have a harder time developing the sense of self. And so if you are the husband in a relationship where that this is something that your spouse is really struggling with or really wants to develop, like how, or maybe it's reverse, but how can you be supportive as a partner? Because, there's this potential for tension.
Yeah.
So what can you do to kind of encourage this growth?
You can ask really good questions like, what's going on? How are you feeling? Instead of like, how was your day? Like, ask more detailed questions.
That's really
good. What's the most fun day of your life? If you could do anything in a day, what would your perfect day be? I had this great conversation with a group of friends. We're like, okay, describe your perfect day. And like, you learned so much about people.
Yeah.
So getting better at asking questions is one. When they do ask for something, support them. Like, well, I kind of want, maybe tentative, like, I kind of want to take this class, or I kind of want to go play pickleball tomorrow, but I don't know about the kids, whatever.
Yeah.
Then say, you're going, I've got the kids, or whatever needs to happen.
Yeah.
And, be supportive in a practical way. A lot of partners are verbally like, oh, I support you in anything you want to do. And it's like, okay, well, I want to do this. Oh no, I can't. My thing is more important than yours, you know?
Yeah.
So be supportive in practical ways as well.
I love that. Like, and recognizing like the tentative, like they're reaching for a self.
Right. Like, is
recognize
this okay?
the reaching. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's so helpful. I like that. Okay. Let's see. Are we to number 10?
Yeah, we're on 10.
Okay. I feel free to do things that I enjoy and I feel deserving of self-care. So we've addressed this a little bit, but I know that someone will be like, but that is selfish. Like taking time, you know, I'm a mom and taking time to just do what I want to do is the definition of selfish. And you've redefined that for us. So maybe now they're already rethinking it. But what do you see when you feel resistance to laziness? And
I say, what kind of a life do you hope your kids will grow up and have? Do you want them to have one without self-care and without fun and without fulfillment? Because you're modeling that for them. So you have to figure out how to be the kind of person you want them to grow up and be. If it's all self-neglect, then that's the model.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And sometimes when I frame it in that way, it's like, oh,
then you can see
it
like
somehow. Because they can see it for their kids, but not themselves. But then you go, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I remember as a young adult or late teens, realizing like, I have to figure out how to be the kind of Mormon woman that my daughters are excited to grow up and like, oh, it's great to grow up and you have so much fun and you have choices and you have freedom and you know, like, like I got to figure this out because that's what I would hope for them.
Want for them. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's such a good way to just sort of check yourself. If you can't see it clearly, that's like
can't
instant
do it for
clarity.
yourself, like think about what you're modeling for those around you. If you don't have children, for your, you know, what are you modeling for your friends, for your extended family? The other kids around you, what, you know, we're modeling how to be grown-ups to people around us.
Yeah. And
if you're modeling self-neglect, then don't be surprised if that's what they grow up and do.
Right. Yeah. With maybe even an extra dose of guilt and shame because they think that's the goal. Like they think they need to be a martyr to be successful. Right. Yeah. That was actually my next question is how do you help kids develop a sense of self? Is there anything besides modeling? You know, how do you sort of encourage that as kids grow up?
Listen more than you talk. Ask them about their experiences. So what do you think? What do you think about that? Instead of tell them what you think, you ask them what they think. Well, how did that feel when your teacher singled you out for not doing your homework? What happened in your body? What happened in your mind? What did you do with that? How can I support you?
Wow.
Just really even helping your child identify their thoughts and identify their feelings. Like they will be light years ahead of most people. I mean, most adults can't even do that. Not most, but a lot that I've come across can't differentiate between thoughts and feelings. It's like, well, I feel that you're being mean. Well, that's not a feeling, that's a thought. You know, I feel sad because I think you're being mean is a feeling and then a thought. So being able to differentiate those and articulate it is so important. That emotional intelligence and emotional vocabulary for your children is a great way. So they feel safe expressing themselves and being able to tolerate difference. So if they think something different, do you feel the need to correct them? Like, oh, yeah. You know? Or can you just say, I see it differently, but that's a really interesting point of view, you know?
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Or is it threatening?
Yeah. So I'm interested in that feeling of being threatened. I think a lot of times we feel that when someone is expressing anger, even kids, like when a kid is angry, that like it's easy to feel really defensive about that. And I think that's another one of those emotions that we sort of, we talk about like the emotion itself is wrong, you know? So how would you like to hear parents talking to children about anger and, you know, in their own life? Like how do we do anger better?
Be using the vocabulary of mad. Because we in our culture, we're like, I'm frustrated. That's mad. Okay, just say mad. Just use angry, mad. Use the words.
Okay.
And something else that we do that's not healthy is we collapse emotion with behavior and call it bad. When emotions and behavior are entirely separate, angry emotions are absolutely normal. Everyone has them every day. It's fine. What you do with it, the behavior can be, positive or negative.
Yeah.
But it's just information, energy in motion. It's information, it's energy to tell you about what's happening around you. But when someone's angry with you and you get defensive, like, what are you making it mean?
Usually some sort of, I think you're taking responsibility for their feeling, and so it feels natural to defend whatever you're feeling vulnerable about.
So that goes kind of back to, which I can't remember which one. Yeah. Being able to tolerate that and like, you're really mad at me. I remember all of my kids have said, I hate you. I hate you. That's just what kids do. And I just say, you're really mad at me. You really wanted to go to your friend's house. And I said, no, you're really mad. You're frustrated. You're angry. You're labeling it,
mirroring it,
instead of making it about you. Like, unless you've done something wrong, then you can apologize or done something hurtful. But don't make it about you.
Yeah. So I feel like we could do a whole episode just on anger, but but before we end, when you're feeling anger, is that something that you have to find a way to express? Like, I feel like anger can so quickly become resentment if it's not expressed.
Yes.
But it also feels like it can feel destructive to even like put words to it.
If you start using, I'm mad, I'm angry, it doesn't become destructive. So energy in motion, emotion, it has to have somewhere to go. So if you say it, like, it's going somewhere. I'm mad at you. You said you were going to be home at this time, or I'm really upset about this, or whatever it is. That's the energy is going somewhere.
Yeah.
Instead of, what we do in our culture is just, oh no, I'm not mad. And then we get serious depression, or we get physical illness, and we just stuff our negative or difficult emotions down, and they come out in other ways. So you might as well just say
so
it.
That's so interesting. So it's really more about like the expulsion. It's not even about, because I think the reason you stuff it is because you don't,
because you think it's bad and you feel shame.
Yeah. And you don't want it out. Like if you can't see the ... what will happen when anger is expressed, then it's really hard to justify the expression. But if the expression itself is part of the solution, that makes so much more sense. Like, then it is justified.
Right.
Just getting it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had an experience where my son, my oldest son I think he was in high school or junior high, and he called me and he left a message. Mom, I'm so mad at you. You keep taking my football chin strap out of the laundry and I'm getting acne on my chin because it hasn't been washed. And I'm really mad at you. Love you. Bye. And I was like, well, he can wash it himself. Like, what, and I started getting defensive, like you're talking about. And then I was like, oh my goodness, this is victory for a therapist. Like, my child can express anger and then end with love you. It doesn't mean anything.
Wow.
It doesn't mean that anything's wrong with our relationship. He's just like, really frustrated and angry. It's like, okay, thanks for telling me.
Yeah. And he already, it sounded like even by the end of the message was like, okay.
Okay, love ya. Bye. See you later,
Yeah.
And it was not the end of the world. And I think we need more models of verbalizing anger, the feeling, without having it be a dart or dagger or something that's a sword to hurt someone,
or a deal breaker, even just like it can't be the end of the conversation.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Julie, thank you so much. This is amazing. I feel like we just need this, our community needs this so much.
You.
So I love all of your work and I'm grateful for this. Tell us how, is there anything we missed?
Oh, no, not that I can think of. We covered, your questions were great.
Oh, well, this is a topic that is close to my heart. So tell us how listeners can find your work.
Yeah. In Utah, my therapy clinic is wasatchfamilytherapy.com.
Okay. In Salt Lake? Or
Farmington,
Salt Lake County? Okay.
Sandy, Lehigh, and St. George.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then drjuliehanks.com, Dr. Julie Hanks is my website. And then at Dr. Julie Hanks on social media. I love connecting with people on social media, particularly Instagram. So,
okay.
Yeah, so I'd love to connect.
Beautiful social media too. It's bright and lots of good energy there. So
thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for listening, and we really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Julie Hanks. And of course, a huge thanks to Julie for coming on. Again, check out the show notes for a link to her guide, 10 Signs of a Healthy Self, and definitely check out the Ask Dr. Julie Hanks podcast. And as always, if Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get a chance, we'd love for you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. It definitely helps get the word out about Faith Matters, and we really, really appreciate your support. Thanks again for listening, and as always, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.